Oh, hello, listeners. I am so excited you clicked play because I want a life where you feel more respected and connected in your relationships. And the guest I have on the show today, that's actually the name of her podcast. And she is an expert at helping us get out of the pattern of nagging and complaining and stepping more into a team model with our relationships, whether we're talking about managing the kids or we're talking about managing the households or we're just talking about managing ourselves and the two of us and no kids, no house involved. So I really appreciate her expertise, and I'm excited to introduce you to Sharon Costanzo. She is a relationship coach and host of the Respected and Connected podcast. She specializes in helping couples work through challenges as a team so they can create a more meaningful and satisfying partnership. I know you will get a lot out of this relationship. She really gives a lot of practical tools and insights for breaking down communication barriers, working through conflict, healing resentment, and all of those things are things that I want for you. So listen in, dear warrior. Hello, warriors. I am so excited you're listening in. I have a wonderful guest today that's going to help us so much, not to put too many expectations on her. But welcome, Sharon, to the Love Your Life show. I am so glad to have you on the show, as I totally resonate with your past and how you got to be doing with what you're doing. And I'm quite sure many of my listeners are living that reality right now. So I'm wondering if you can take us back, take the listener who may not have heard of you yet, back to before you discovered coaching, when you were, to use your words, a resentful, burnt out mom, settling for a good enough marriage. We're like, yep, right here.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, if you go back to like the very beginning, I think that's what was modeled for me.
Mm,
The women in my family were very accommodating of the men in my family. My grandmothers included, my mom. That was, I think most people grew up with that was kind of the model of marriage.
yeah, good point. I
There's a
am.
little bit of control that comes along with that being accommodating, but that was the model of marriage. And I always kind of felt like that wasn't what I wanted for myself. And I grew up in a family with three brothers. My parents are both very practical people. My dad's an engineer and my mom's an accountant. And my mom she never worked full time while I was growing up. She worked part time until I was about 11, and then she didn't work outside of the home after that. But I was like, I'm going to find a really like respectable career. And if I can have like this really respectable career, that will be my ticket out of being like this resentful,
Mm,
submissive housewife. So I studied engineering. I have two engineering degrees. And I grew up in this is just very conservative Christian culture. And most men did not want to marry somebody who was probably smarter than them and ambitious and independent. I owned my own house. I had a career. Once I got out of college, I was 22. I was out of college. I didn't really date a whole lot. I would go on a lot of first dates. They would ask me, "What do you do?" I would say, "Well, I'm an engineer. I work for the utility company. I own a house." And it was like,
they're like,
what,
goodbye. Oh, goodness.
and I have to feel for these men because they have been taught that their value is in providing
Mm,
for their family, and it was like, well, and I
you're
relate
changing
to
the
this too
rules.
with the
Yeah.
men that I work with. If my wife is just as capable of providing for herself as I am, then what am I here for?
Mm.
We're still in this renegotiation. I think even in 2024, a lot of couples are still figuring this out. How do we create something different than what we were modeled?
Mm.
But anyways, I wasn't dating a whole lot. I wasn't going on a whole lot of second dates. Um, and then I met my husband at work, so he knew what I did for work, and it was like this breath of fresh air. He
Mm.
knows who I am at work. He knows that I'm ambitious. He knows that I'm smart, and he's not intimidated by me. And I just assumed
Mhm.
that that would mean that at home he would also things would be more equitable at home as well. But he grew up in a home where it was I think the women in his home maybe were less resentful than the women in my home. Um, just playing very traditional roles in the home. And so, for the first few years of our marriage before we had kids, we kind of settled into that. I was doing most of the work inside the home with meal prep, housekeeping, all of that. And I had the energy to do it
Mm,
before we had kids. But then when we had our first child, and he didn't really fulfill my expectations of what a co-parent would be like, and all of the work felt like it was on my shoulders, I did become pretty angry and
mhm,
resentful. And of course, surprise, surprise, trying to talk to him about it from that angry and resentful position did not go well.
mm,
And we went to several couples counselors through those first several years of our marriage. And I just felt like the counseling that we were getting was kind of trying to smooth things over
mm,
without really addressing the heart of the issue. I was like, I just need somebody to tell my husband that he's got to step up. Like,
mhm.
I was like, why is nobody seeing this and telling him that? Why does everybody think that this is acceptable and I just need to be nicer and deal with it?
Ah, oh,
That's the way
that's
it
like the
felt.
yeah, oh, just be nicer and think different thoughts and fall in line, Sharon. Like this is what we're all
Yeah,
doing, what
yeah.
we've been doing for
What's the big deal?
decades. Yeah. Mm,
So we kind of went through that, several rounds of that, and we did eventually, after we had our second child, our two kids are close together. They're 18 months apart, a little less than 18 months apart. And I ended up stopping work with my second child to be at home. And that just compounded the issues
mm,
because then I was just the assumed default for everything. And my husband was in grad school at the time. And anyways, things kind of came to a head to where I just said, if something doesn't change, then I don't want to be married anymore.
mm,
And he was like, well, I think this situation is impossible. I don't think that you'll ever be happy. And he ended up moving out for just a couple of weeks. It wasn't like an official
right.
separation or anything, but we really started kind of trying to figure things out a little bit more diligently at that point. And we kind of succeeded at smoothing things over a little
Mm,
bit. And I went back to work, and then the thing that was so interesting, I love telling this story because I was like, I was not working full time for the utility company anymore. I was running a tutoring center, and I was like, I need something different for my career. I really like working with people. I really like that part of my job in the tutoring center. I think I would make a great coach.
mm,
And so I signed up for a coaching course on how to run a coaching business. And I was doing market research for my niche. And every woman I was talking to working moms, was having the same problem as me.
You're like, hmm.
And I told my business coach, I had a little consult with her, and I said, I don't know what to do. Like, every woman I'm talking to is having problems with getting their spouse to help and be an equitable partner in the home. And when I've been, trying to push my husband to be more of a support at home, it's almost ended my marriage. And that business coach, she just kind of paused and she said to me, you said push. And it was like I connected the dots.
Yeah.
What we learn in sales is you don't push people to buy things from you, right? You
Mm,
invite them into a vision of the future that they want for themselves.
yeah.
And that was such a huge mindset shift for me because I had grown up being pushed my whole life. That was how I achieved success in all areas of my life. And it worked for me. It worked for my personality. It didn't work well. I've had a lot of
Right. It kind of
unpacking to do,
energy.
but
Yeah.
I was able to accomplish a lot growing up in a family with parents that pushed me, and nobody ever modeled to me what it looked like to then be a partner with somebody
Mm,
and ask them, well, what do you think? What kind of a marriage do you want? What do you think is a fair way to do all of
yeah.
this? How do we want to feel about each other in this marriage? We didn't have any of those kind of conversations. We just fought about the things that weren't working. And so that was a huge shift for me. And that's when, as I kind of started working through that with my husband and having a different approach to that, that's when I decided I really want to support other women who are on this
Mm,
journey. And I really want there to be another option for women who want to have a fair and equitable partnership
mhm.
with their spouse and are struggling. I want there to be options and tools and resources and even just the hope that that's possible.
Yeah.
Because what so many women are told when things aren't going well in their marriage is, well, you just need to get angry until he hears you,
Mhm.
or you just need to suck it up and deal with it because this is just
Mm.
what marriage is, or you need to leave.
Yes. Yeah.
And nobody's telling women or couples, nobody's telling couples how to transform the relationship, how
Mhm.
to make it something that works better
It's like
for both
option
of you.
D, please. I mean, right? I mean, for sure. It's that because even the nagging and the complaining, I think that's where the burnout comes from. Because you do it, you do it, you do it, but then it's very like parent child, so that's not sexy at all, and
No.
it's still all on your shoulders, like to do
Mhm.
so that I do think it's like these two choices where you either just suck it up. And I remember my parents saying like, you're happy enough, Susie, like that good enough marriage, like, okay, well, this is, and you look around and that's what everyone else is doing. Um, and you get together with your girlfriends and you complain and then you go back and do the same old damn thing. So I really appreciate this other option here. So how do you help people? Like, what would you say to the people when, how do you help them shift from complaining to asking or inviting? I like your word, inviting them for the support, into this different vision. I'm quite sure most people would like to spend less time nagging and complaining. Like that's not, sort of our vision of the Disney marriage. Like let's get together and just nag for the rest of our lives. And yet I know many people will say, but that's the only thing that works. So help us.
And I do. And I think also along those same lines, one of the complaints that I hear often is, well, yeah, they'll step up for a little while and then we go back
Right.
to our
Yeah,
same
it's
old
working
pattern.
now, but yes, for sure.
Yeah. And
And
I
then there's
think,
still like I know the list, it's like a very tenuous, like you're holding on and it just you don't really trust it still.
oh, yeah, it's definitely a familiar dynamic for so many couples. I hear that all the time. The progress feels very fragile.
Hmm.
And the thing that I recommend for most couples is to start really small
Hmm.
and expect things to change incrementally.
Hmm.
And with that, I just did a couples call about this. Like, celebrate those tiny moments of
Hmm.
progress. And not in like a patronizing way, like, way to
Right.
go, you swept the floor, you're amazing, here's a cookie. Like, not like that. But I think a really good model for a lot of couples is just to plan to talk about how your partnership is functioning about once a week, especially
Hmm.
when you're getting started. I had a couple that um, had just been married for a few years and they had their first child and they were dealing with this same dynamic. And so we sat down and we talked about, okay, well, how do you want your morning to go?
Hmm. Yes.
From the time you get up at 6 until 8:30 when you both start working, they have a 1-year-old. What could that look like?
Hmm.
And really negotiating it and working it out and then saying, okay, over the next 3 or 4 weeks, I want you to expect this to be about 50 to 60% successful.
Mm, yeah.
So having those realistic expectations and not just making it a single conversation, because I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that we make is we talk about it once. Okay, I want you to start, and we're also pretty vague about what we want to. I want you to start contributing more.
Right. Right. I want you to do
I
more
want you
around
to
the
do
house.
more
What the
cleaning.
heck does that mean? Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do more housework or clean the kitchen after dinner. maybe what they think cleaning the kitchen is not what you think
For
cleaning
sure.
the kitchen is. I love the book Fair Play for talking about this issue because she talks about, there's conception, there's planning, and there's execution.
Hmm.
And one of the complaints that many women have is, well, their husband just says, just tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Right.
But she's still doing all of the conception and planning.
Mhm.
So 70% of the work she's already done before she even says, hey, clean the kitchen or hey, vacuum. So we need to rethink what it looks like to own the chores, to be very specific. If household chores is your issue, these principles apply to other conflicts as well. But if household chores is your issue, to talk very specifically about what you would like, and you got to treat your spouse like a partner and not like a child so that they can have some input. Like, I think maybe that's your
Right.
standards are much higher than mine. Can we compromise? Can we talk about what our standards are without being like making it a moral issue
Mhm. Oh
that
my
we
gosh,
have
adding
different.
the moral in there. Yeah, I just want to circle back to a couple things you said in that, like, this is, having not just one conversation, it's not a one and done, to have multiple. You also said it's great to start in early days. And I know many of my listeners, are already, they have the teens, or even the teens that have left the nest. And it's really important that any time is a fine time to have this conversation, because, your marriage, it's like the more, or your relationship, the more we just sort of suck it up and keep going, it's either growing or shrinking. So that would be the shrinking path. And so at
Mm-hmm.
any point, empty nest is a great time to reevaluate, like, okay, so what does it take as a team to run this house? What are your standards? What are mine? And I do find for my husband and I, it's super helpful. We use a scale of 1 to 10 where, it's like, I'm like, how important is this to you? Like clean kitchen floors to him is like a 2, to me is like an 8. So I take that on.
Mm-hmm.
To him, he, like, the laundry being done a certain way, he's an 8 out of 10. I am like a 0. I'm like, 1 out of 10 maybe. And so
Yeah.
then that helps us decide which task we're completely handing over. And then I need to get out of his business as to how he's doing the laundry, when he's doing the laundry, where he's putting the laundry, and he needs to get out of my business with, I mean, I think I have a good deal because the kitchen floor, I don't do that often. you know, and I just want to remind listeners that any time is a fine time to do this, because resentment and that feeling of resentment is a black ooze that hurts your relationship, but also this feeling of being sort of the parent in a relationship is not healthy and sexy and good for like, you have someone else to manage. It's demoralizing and emasculating for your partner, and also for you, because then you just don't have this trust and faith in them. I do, one more thing I want to circle back to is, in the beginning, you had said, it's amazing that in 2024 we're still dealing with this dynamic of gendered, and to me, I'm like, it makes absolute sense. And I think that's what we're really pushing up against and looking for us all. I do sometimes, this is a little off topic, but sometimes on this show I talk about male and female energy, and sort of the
Mm-hmm.
authentic strong male energy is that, like, standing strong and firm, and not, and knowing, yeah, this is, if we're talking household, this is my task, I'm doing this and I'm doing it my way, and a very confident, calm, assured, male energy. And the calm, assured female energy is letting someone care for you, releasing, surrender, let it be how it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the negative female energy is that whiny, complaining, nagging, like, that sort of piece, that when I'm in
Mm-hmm.
that energy, that just doesn't feel good. So I think it's all coming to a head. Um, and I do think it just happens whether both partners are working or not. One is staying home. Because there was some study, and you might know this study better than me, but there was some study that showed, in terms of equity in the house, in terms of tasks, that if the man was working and the woman was a stay-at-home mom, then the woman did more of the labor. If the man and woman were working and the man was earning more and then the woman still was doing more. If the man and woman were working, making the same amount, the woman still was doing more. man and woman making more, woman was still doing more at home. And the only time that it got to somewhat, equal is if the woman was working, earning the income, and the man was staying at home. But then it was only sometimes because it was still the woman felt guilty and was, it's like, oh my gosh, how is that possible? And it is, I really appreciate your approach because you are very quick to take responsibility also. Like, yes, we can point fingers, and yet that's what leads to resentment and bitterness versus notice, like, we're all playing this role here. Whether our partners were raised in a certain way or not, and what they're seeing at their office work. So to step out of it is super helpful. I guess one thing when we're talking about weekly meetings or we're talking about, looking at different stages of the year, like September is a
Mm-hmm.
great time. Like, okay, let's reevaluate how we're doing household tasks or,
Mm-hmm.
different stages of life with empty nest. What do you say to the listener who is like, oh my gosh, Sharon and Susan, Sharon and Susie, I don't even go by Susan, but Sharon and Susie, like, they're resistant to bringing up the topic of household responsibilities because in the past their partner has been defensive or has been angry and it hasn't gone well. How would you start that conversation different or
Yeah, I think it's so helpful. I mean, the biggest mistake that I made and the biggest lesson that I learned was to assume positive intent. Just
mm,
have a charitable interpretation of my husband's behavior and just be like, there's kind of two thoughts that come to mind. One of them is taking full responsibility. If you've been at this for a while and it still isn't going well, if you've never brought it up before, it can be really helpful to lead with something like, hey, I know in the past this is how it's been, and I've given you the impression that it's okay. I want things to be different for us in the future. Let's say if you're thinking about empty nesting and you've been the default homemaker for all of that time, and now you have, maybe your husband's looking at retiring and he's going to have a whole lot more freedom. I'd like to talk about how things can be different for us in the future. That was one thought that I had. Another one is just that I know this hasn't gone well in the past. This conversation hasn't gone well in the past. I
mm,
would really like for this conversation to go better for both of us.
mm.
That can just kind of
Just sort of
disarm.
calling it out like I haven't been, yeah.
And I'm partly to blame for that. And you can own your part of that. This is what I've done to make this conversation not go well.
Hmm.
I haven't been very patient with you when you haven't done things the way that I wanted them to be done. I haven't been very clear about what my expectations are. If you can them, confront yourself in front of them, that can be really helpful. And then just be really patient with, they're not going to trust you probably. It's
Right.
going to feel like manipulation, and just be like, I really am sincerely trying to do this differently.
Yeah. Well,
Um, and
sorry, go on.
and some couples will need some help to even
Hmm.
get this conversation going. I think a
Yeah.
lot of couples don't have all of the skills and capacity to do it without working with a coach or therapist who's skilled in helping couples really navigate conflict and negotiate with each other.
For sure that they've had too many programs in there. I was just going to say like, and or like to the person who's like, oh my gosh, conflict. Well, then just start small. Maybe you don't even have to call out the elephant in the room, but start by saying like, hey, I'd like mornings to go differently in
Mm-hmm.
September. Could we be more of a team when the kids are getting ready for school between, 6:30 and 7:30? And
Mm-hmm.
that in itself might make our listeners' nervous systems go a
Yeah.
little crazy, but it is so interesting because there's so much here. There's so much weight. You said that the man has been programmed to provide for us. Well, as a woman in a patriarchal society, we've been programmed to support others. And so us asking for, a team approach to the morning with the kids, I know a lot of thought nonsense is going to come up with like, but he's, making the money, or this is my job as a woman, or this is what I've always done. And those are all thought patterns and beliefs that for sure coaching can help you with. So I very much appreciate that. I think this is a good part. You really speak well about differentiation, and is that comes up, in terms of healthy relationships. It is not something we are taught either. And could you speak to us a little about differentiation and what it is, or why many of us
Yeah, so
have it?
I think of differentiation as like allowing myself to be different from my partner and being able to like hold on to my sense of self,
Mm,
not needing to change them, not needing to change myself. I think one trademark of lacking differentiation is feeling that pressure to accommodate. You
mm,
know, one aspect of differentiation when it comes to the household chores is like letting things happen in a way that you wouldn't choose, not needing to micromanage it,
that
you
your way
know?
isn't always the right way.
Like on my one day a week, I go into the office early in the morning and my husband takes the kids to school and my daughter's hair doesn't get done.
Yeah.
And just being like, you know what, this is no reflection of me and the kind of person that I am.
Mm,
I'm comfortable enough in my sense of self and my humanity to just allow that to help happen. I have enough sense of worth within myself
mm.
that I'm not constantly dysregulated
Yeah.
by how I might perceive others might see me.
But that sense of worth, like you just hit the nail on the head, where it's like, so not only do you have a sense of worth with strangers, or, people, acquaintances thinking thoughts about your daughter's hair, but this, where differentiation has been coming up for me, is this sense of worth in myself, in the relationship, that he can think that I'm doing the wrong thing, or he can think that I should be, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a way that this came up recently. And like he can think that um that I don't need a new computer or something, or he can think that I'm spending my day, that I shouldn't be working until 5 p.m. every day. And part of me is like having that confidence in myself and my decision to be like, okay, he can think that. I think
Mhm.
differently. And we can still, it doesn't have to take the marriage down or take my self esteem down a hole where it used to. Because I was constantly looking externally for how I could feel internally, sort of that outside in living. And like
Mhm.
if my husband said something was wrong, well then God, it must be wrong,
Right. Right.
And
Or I
if
need to fix how they feel about me.
I
I
need
need
to
to
talk
start
so much and
explaining
explain to
to
him.
them. And yeah,
That
yeah, one of the
over
examples.
explaining. Yeah.
Or protesting, that's another one that comes up often when I'm working with my
Hmm.
clients. Like, there's no need to protest.
Yeah.
They can have their thoughts and feelings about what's going on. And of course, I care about how my husband sees me, but
Hmm.
I get to decide, how much of that is true about the way I see myself and how much of that is something that I want to change because I care about the relationship. One of the funny ones that I share often is, I grew up in a family with minivans. I've always thought that minivans are great. My husband hates minivans.
Hmm.
And when I was ready to get a new car, I was like, this is the car that I want. And he didn't want me to have that car. And I've heard a lot of women say, well, my husband wanted me to have this car, so this is the car I have. And I was like, I buy the car that I want to drive. And
Yeah.
he can have his feelings about it. And
Mm.
we can still have a good relationship. We can still feel like we have each other's back and we care about each other. It doesn't have to mean, and I do think like what you said, it's easier for us to be differentiated with people who aren't quite as close to us.
Yeah, and it's still hard. I guess my listeners are very familiar with the language of codependency and this, giving other people control over how we're feeling. That if he thinks you bought the wrong car, well, then you must have bought the wrong car. And if,
Hmm.
my husband thinks I don't need a computer, then I must not need a computer. That sort of codependency and looking to them to see how we feel. Whereas differentiation is really talking about this more interdependent model of, Sharon gets to do Sharon and Sharon's husband gets to do him. And then together you're stronger in that
Mhm.
relationship. And I do find that a lot of therapy and a lot of the things we see on Instagram and TikTok and all those places does not support this so much. They're like, you have needs, go tell your partner their needs, and then they better meet your needs. Versus,
Yeah, well, yeah,
mhm,
and we're even seeing like, well, if they cared about you, then they
yeah,
would.
yeah,
And that just makes me cringe every time. And it's like, your spouse can care deeply about you and not care about the same things that you care about.
like whose job is it to manage so say I gave a talk and I am feeling, whose job is it for me to feel good about myself and my talk? My partner's? Do I need to go tell him? And then I get annoyed because he didn't say, wow, Susie, how was your talk today? Was it really good?
Mhm.
No, that's not his job. It's my job. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, this codependency, sort of putting it in someone else's hands, is very dangerous. Um,
Yeah.
and making it mean something about the relationship, that
Mhm.
if he's not able to meet your needs in that way, then something must be wrong. um
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the ways that this comes up in my work, this kind of codependency is, I might invite somebody to a couples call or something, and they'll be like, oh, I don't think I can ask my husband. I don't think he would want to. And I think when you're more differentiated, you can just say, hey, I would really like to do this with you.
mhm,
I think it will be good for our relationship for these reasons. Would you be willing to join me?
mhm,
And you're not like dependent on them being like super thrilled and enthusiastic.
mhm.
Are you willing
Right.
to do it with a decent attitude?
Yeah,
Then you can not worry the whole time and watch them and be like, are they having a good time? Did
yeah.
did Sharon say something that offended him or made him defensive? Like you're just like, if he's willing to come, I'm just gonna come in, I'm gonna enjoy it, I'm gonna learn what I can learn, and then maybe we can talk about it later. But I'm not gonna be like on edge the whole time worrying about their
Mhm.
experience.
I love that example because it's that, like, not needing him to feel how you feel about it, like not needing him to buy into, like, this is the greatest idea, Susie, to go to Sharon. I'm so excited. It's like, no, he's willing to come because he sees that it's important to you and because he's decided that that's okay with him or whatever. But for him to be there like this happy little puppy, like, what a great idea. Like, it's just, that's, it's not fair to the relationship. It's putting a lot of pressure on both. Yeah, I
Yeah.
really, very helpful. Well, thank you. I very much think that you've provided a lot of information today to help people just sort of get out of this burnout, move a little more into feeling, empowered and like a team in their relationship. I guess one thing I just really wanted to circle on and highlight, because you do really well, is this ability for people to get their needs met without feeling needy. And
Mhm.
what I heard you say is really getting clear and precise with the communication you're using. Like, what are your needs? Would you agree? Like, how could
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, the way I kind of define being needy, it's kind of that same codependence
Mhm.
of I stress a lot about even asking for something, and then I'm so dependent on whether or not they are able and willing to do it and to do it with an enthusiastic nature and reassure me that I haven't asked for too much,
Right.
that we can create so much drama around making a simple request, whether it's, hey, I'd really like the mornings to go differently for us. I'd really like to maybe read a book together about relationships and talk about it. I'd really like to meet with a coach or a therapist and talk about our relationship, or I'd really like to have 2 or 3 hours a week where I'm off duty and unavailable.
Mhm.
Whatever it is, just
Mhm.
asking for it and being willing to hear their response, being willing to negotiate as needed. A phrase that I really like is, what can I do for you to make it easier for you to do what I'm asking? That
Mhm.
to me is empowering to the relationship. I'm treating this like a partnership. I'm not just asking for my needs to be met, but I'm considering you and what it would cost you to give me what I'm asking for.
Mhm.
I'm willing to make this a give and take situation. It really is a for a lot of us it's a developmental process. It's
It
something
is,
that we didn't
yeah.
learn growing up.
That
And
was
it
coming up
takes
for me. I mean,
time.
it's confidence. It is because it's this like asking. It's so funny. Like, I feel that many listeners will feel like if their spouse or partner asks, or a friend asks them for something, it's almost like an automatic yes. Like, of course, okay, I'll do it. Like, you want to play golf for 3 hours in the weekend? Okay, I'll do it. Or like, you want to sleep in on Saturday? Okay, fine. But when it's us asking, it is this, first of all, we feel, guilt and, oh my gosh, we're doing something wrong. So that's that developmental piece of feeling more confident. And it's also, it's just flipping it all. Like, if he said, like, I just was coaching someone recently who their husband was like, I'd really like you to cook more, and I'd like more home cooked meals, like Monday through Friday. And she was like, I would too, and I don't like to cook. What are we gonna do? And
Mhm.
it's like, okay, right. Like, are we gonna get a little fairy in here? Because I'm not, like, that just drags me. And I just loved her
Yeah.
confidence and being like, great that you want more home cooked meals. I do too. How do we put our heads together to problem solve this? Same thing with a woman who's like, I want to go to a yoga class 3 times a week, an hour a week. It's 7 p.m. on, and like, how are we going to make this work? That maybe it is the spouse, taking time off from work, or maybe it's like, hey, let's problem solve together and get a
Mhm.
babysitter in here, or, you know,
Yeah.
he wants to golf every Saturday, and it's like, okay, I get it, totally understand that's not really going to work for our family dynamic because we have, at this stage, but maybe empty nesting that's going to, but it's having, I guess it's two things, moving away from that like self-abandonment of automatically saying yes of our own, of our own. And then the second is asking for what we want and expecting not for him to do the automatic yes, like that we don't want him to do the same, behavior that we're doing, but more of that team approach there also. So I really,
Yeah. Yeah, I like how you said like what's going to work for our family dynamic, and
mm,
I think the more we give our spouse and our kids kind of room to respond to us from a place of generosity, the more generous they're going to be able to be with us. But if we expect them to respond out of obligation,
yeah,
we're not going to get a whole lot of generosity. And I think what most of us really want is a generous relationship where we're really generous with each other.
yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great place to end because it is that like generosity. I guess one thing I just want to say is just keep peeling back the the things that you're asking for in life. Like, I just find, I raised 3 boys, many of it I was a single mom for many years, and it was just I let go of so many of the things that I thought were important, that, certain like shelves needed to be dusted, or and it was just in really really like peeling back the layers of like, what is important? Okay, what's important to me? What do I think, I want to do? That it helped me get clear on like, okay, I'm going to feed them dinner every night, and I'm going to, make sure they have food in the fridge so they can make their lunches, whatever it was for me. And also, so I wasn't bringing that layer of, like you just said, obligation. Like, I wasn't telling myself a lie, like, oh, I have to do this. I'm like, no, actually, some of this you don't have to do. Like, and you could choose not to. And maybe your neighbor thinks you are not good because you're having your son walk in the freezing cold and that's okay. But
Yeah.
again, the confidence, because then it allows for that generosity in relationship. It allows us to be closer
Hmm.
and yeah, it's complicated, but I like what you're saying. It's like one step at a time.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Just focus on the one next thing
Hmm.
and work on it. Keep your expectations low, keep your appreciation high. But I would say don't keep your expectations so low that you're not moving forward.
Yeah.
But don't expect things to just change overnight and to
Yeah.
wake up with a completely different dynamic in your relationship.
Yeah. And that it can change. So yes, to
Oh,
keep
for
taking
sure.
steps, because if we're not taking steps, we're going backwards. We're either shrinking or growing. So we want to grow.
Mhm.
So my dear Sharon, like if my listeners want to hear more from you, where can I direct them? I will put all links in the show notes.
Yeah, so my podcast is called Respected and Connected, and it's on all the major podcast platforms. You can also find it on my website, which is respectedandconnected.com. It's just all three words spelled out. And then on Instagram, I haven't been super active on Instagram lately, but I do have an account and I share some things on there as well. Respected underscore and underscore connected. And of course, if you're interested in talking to me about working together, you can schedule a free consult call with me on my website.
Awesome. I will put all those links in the show notes, and I think we'll be at smbwell.com/315. And I really appreciate your time here helping us create some ease and respect and connectedness in our relationships. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.